Basaglia, the man, the myth, and I'll let him educate all of you on what it's about. Thank you so much for coming.
Absolutely. All right. Thank you, Jordan. It's great to be here. Hi, great to be here, everybody. Tom Basaglia from Viza Property Management. I want to talk a little bit today about some of my setbacks. I feel like at these events, a lot of what you hear is, success, how much money someone made on a deal, how they find a deal. I want to talk a little bit like the reality of what it is to be a property manager and an investor and some of the things that you have to be prepared to deal with on a regular basis, right? So tonight I'm going to tell you a little bit about Viza Property Management, who we are, who's on my team, what kind of properties we service, and then I'll get into some of those setbacks like I talked about, followed by some of our successes along the way and the lessons that we've learned from those deals. And finally, the 5 investment rules that we've came up with as a result of all those lessons we've learned since we started this journey back in 2018. And finally, a little bit more about the services we offer, the tech stack we use, and our realtor referral program. I'm sure there's a lot of real estate agents in here who specialize in buying and selling homes, which is not what we do, but we're able to partner with real estate agents by being their preferred property management company. All right, so this is the team. We started in 2018, started in Little Ferry, moved to Linden, and we're finally here at hopefully our permanent home, Hoboken, New Jersey. We're based in Mission 50, the co-working space in Southwest Hoboken. You have myself, Tyler, he does all of our leasing, rent collection, lease renewals. Chandler, all of our maintenance, repairs, vendor relations, things of that nature. My sister, Christy, she does accounting, bookkeeping, administrative efforts, that whole side of the business. And finally, Ryan Lemon, head of marketing, a lot of owner outreach, mailing campaigns, design, all that good stuff. So we primarily service landlords for single family, multifamily, and mixed-use properties from central to northern New Jersey. And when I say central, I'm starting pretty much at Camden County and going all the way up to state. But we did recently just start managing for HOAs as well, which is when we're retained by the 5 board members of a condo building to manage the building rather than a landlord. And we currently have 200 units under management, of which about 100 are properties that are owned and managed, and then the other 100 are third-party rentals. Okay, so this is setback number 1. This is a portfolio purchase in South Jersey. We got a pretty good deal on this one. We paid a little over $300,000 for all of them when they're worth probably about $200,000 per property, so we'll have a lot of equity going into the deal. It sounds great, but property number 1, top left-hand corner, we didn't get to go inside the property prior to closing, and it actually had a lot of knob and tube wiring. So, it was tough to find an electrician who was comfortable working on that. It's typically seen as like a fire hazard. So, we ultimately did find someone, but we spent a lot more than we thought we would, about $6,000 more because of that fact. Secondly, this building had a lot of structural issues. We had temporary support beams in the basement, and obviously the city was not going to be okay with that before we put a tenant in. So we had to, get a structural engineer, get the plans done, submit the permits, do the work, close out the permits. That was another $4,000 and set us back quite a bit timeline-wise. And then finally, when we were putting a tenant in, we failed a lead inspection test. It's very sensitive, probably 2 times. So that's another month of $2,000. We didn't have somebody in that unit. So right there, we're at about $12,000, $13,000 in unanticipated costs before anything in one deal. Property number 2, down here, we bought that. We had somebody inside of it. They unfortunately broke their lease only about a month after we closed on it. And typically, there's not a significant cost, but here there was, because this tenant lived there for almost 20 years. So the whole, apartment just by default had to be turned over. Floors, kitchen cabinets, the whole 9. We spent about $10,000 turning that one over. And when things couldn't get worse, we actually had a pipe burst in the kitchen a couple days after we finished the renovation, right? During those frigid temperatures. So then we had to redo a lot of the work we just did. That's another $5,000. And we were unsuccessful even getting in any insurance money because we couldn't prove that the heat was indeed on at the time of the event. And, we only have so much time to fight with the insurance company. Sometimes you gotta cut the losses and just keep it moving. But some of the implications, we had to do a capital call, right? Most deals we do have investors. So we had to, tell them a few things. One, did not go according to plan. You hate to do it because it makes you appear incompetent, maybe reduces the chance of investing with you again on the next deal, but it was something that had to be done to get the guys paid. And in addition to that, we had our insurance company threatening to cancel our policy because they saw that we had 2 vacant properties when this was an occupied policy, right? They don't want to see long-term vacancy. That's a much more riskier type of property, and that's going to be much more expensive insurance policy. So in the midst of all that, I had to fight with them just to keep the existing insurance policy in place. So lesson number 1, obviously you want to have the liquidity because no matter what, things are going to go wrong. Whether that be cash, home equity line of credit, business line of credit, you have to have those funds available. Just know where they're going to come from. But I do want to point out, even though we were hit for a lot of cash early on, because we bought at such a good price, we were well protected here, right? We bought for around $300,000, put in about $75,000, and they're still worth about $600,000 altogether. So from a deal standpoint, the deal still is very good. Got a lot of equity, but you had some of those unanticipated reserves that you had to pay out right away. All right, this is setback number 2. This is a mixed-use property we just bought in South Jersey. It's 6 residential units, 3 commercial units. One of the things, we bought it for $750,000 with a 975 ARV. That was some of the numbers on it. But we bought it without obtaining a DCA inspection because we thought we got a really good deal, and they didn't have any paperwork to show what currently existed. Like, it was registered with the state of New Jersey, but an inspection wasn't done for many years. So I bought it regardless because I thought that for the price I was getting it for, I could inherit whatever risk came with keeping the property in compliance. So as soon as we bought it, we updated the DCA's contact portal, and so they came out, they did an inspection, and they found that they thought the fire escape was in poor condition and had to be almost either fully replaced or substantially repaired. And it goes all the way down this side of the building, it goes down that side of the building, and it's in the back. So to replace this thing altogether would have been $85,000, which was not something we were planning on doing, especially right off the bat, right? So I didn't accept that. I was able to get a structural engineer who was willing to get out there and tell me what we had to do to increase the load-bearing capacity of this structure, and luckily, we were able to get it done, get the plans, permits, all that, for only about $5,000, right? As opposed to replacing the entire thing for $80,000. We also had a few tenancy issues here. We had one residential tenant immediately not pay, so I had to file an eviction complaint. That's one unit not paying rent. A second, about a week and a half in, we had a tenant pass away, which, these things happen. And when that happens, you got to try to get in contact with the family, find out when they're going to take the possessions out, and when you could get the unit back so you could renovate it and put it back on the market. Because however long that's outstanding, you're not making anything. Technically, the family's estate is responsible for it, but in those situations, we just try to, not hold the family responsible. And finally, this unit did come with one vacant commercial unit, and this was far more difficult to rent than we thought it would be. We had first hired a commercial broker who was doing a lot of business in the area, and for 2 months they did everything they could, marketing this thing, trying to find a tenant for this 750 square foot, $900 a month commercial space, and it wasn't happening. So he actually ended up giving it back. He didn't even want to try to lease it anymore. He said, it's not even worth my time. So, that was, kind of hurts you a little bit because you say, wow, I can't even pay somebody to lease this thing for me. So we had to put it on LoopNet, right? That's $150 a month cost. That's the equivalent of MLS for commercial properties. We had to put signage on the building. We did some mailing campaigns to all the business owners in the town. And finally, we were able to get somebody, a pretty good tenant at that, basically a home visiting nurse company that needed a home, primary office space. So luckily it did work out, but it took far longer and costed a lot more money than anticipated. And it delayed the time for the refinance because our bank wanted to see that this property was fully occupied before they were willing to close the loan. So some of the takeaways from this deal if I could have done it again, right, I probably would have insisted on having a DCA inspection done prior to closing. Not saying you're going to use that to kill the deal, but it's just good to know exactly what you're getting into, right? You want to know what they're going to ask you to do after closing to keep the property in compliance, because those DCA fines are, quite expensive. You want to have a commercial lease-up plan, or at least if you have any commercial space, you really have to look at it and say, what is the average daily traffic, the foot traffic, what's the tenant makeup of existing businesses or surrounding businesses, because that's all going to play into who you might be able to attract to a space like this, right? There's a lot more that goes into it than renting an apartment, and you got to be prepared for that. And finally, it would have been good to just have tenant payment records. With that, I would have probably acted much sooner on the tenant that we had to evict for non-payment, had I known they were a problem tenant in the past.
Tommy, where was that property?
Mount Holly. Yeah. Setback number 3, we had an attempted portfolio purchase. Well, still may happen. This is in Beechwood, New Jersey. Portfolio consisting of a 4-family, a 2-family, and a single. And we were right at the closing line, had to clear to close, ready to go. And then the town came back and said that the 4-family was being used illegally as a 3-family. So that was pretty disheartening. We still have the contract on the deal, and they're trying to work it out with the town. But as of now, we're standing at a $5,000 loss between attorney fees, the appraisal fees, financing, all of that. And that's not to mention all of my time in doing the due diligence on the deal, right? Reviewing the leases, the operating expenses, and setting up the investors, right? Because we have an investor on every deal. And so we put together the operating agreement, have conversations, get the money lined up. And to have done all that for a deal to potentially not close, it hurts. So some of the lessons, I think you just have to be prepared for this. This is just the cost of doing business. You're going to put properties under contract, which are great deals subject to you doing all of your due diligence, right? And that's exactly what happened here. It was a great deal. We were buying it for 1.3. It appraised for 1.95 after minimal renovation. And we still may have the opportunity to close if the seller is able to correct the issue. And secondly, I would just say really try to only pursue great deals, right? You only have so much bandwidth and so much money you want to sink into deals you may or may not close on. So I would say really get hyper-focused on only going after the deals that have a lot of meat on the bone that you could afford to make mistakes on and still make money. All right, this is just some of the criminal activity we've had over the years. Gun discharge, domestic violence, SWAT team raid, drive-by shooting, axe attack, stabbing inside, stabbing outside, drug overdose, and being held up with a gun myself. So it kind of stinks to say, I hate to put it this way, but I just have to say, these are the things. The other night, I got called by the detective from the city of Gloucester City, and they said, there's a shooting at your property. A tenant shot a gun through the floor. We can't find them. We're trying to get inside the unit downstairs and find out if they're okay. And at that point, there's a lot running through your mind. Obviously you're concerned for the tenant, but you're also concerned, for yourself. Like, this happened in my own property. Like, what could potentially happen? No matter what, everybody wants to hold the landlord liable. And they expect you to help them, right? They're like, where did this guy go? And the town also expects you to look to evict that person for criminal activity, and you probably should do it because you're expected to keep the other tenants in the building safe. If you know you have a criminal in the building and there's active stuff out against them, you should probably address them, right? The other extremely inconvenient one was the axe attack, because that one was messy. We had an axe attack in the hallway of a common area of a multifamily building. And the cops called, same old, Tom, we took this guy out, he's gone, you don't have to worry about him. But he said, we're not cleaning up the blood. Like, you gotta send someone over there to clean it up. So, that's one of the things. If you're not prepared to go over there and address a situation like that, or you don't have a property manager, or you don't have a handyman who's willing to do it, I'm not saying this is gonna happen every day, but these are the situations you find yourself in. All right, some more positive stuff. This is the first rental purchase we've had, City of Newark. We started buying a lot of properties in Essex County, Newark, Orange. So this is when I first realized, that this really is a people business. I think it's not until you get inside a unit after closing for the first time and you meet the family, the kids, the pets, and you're like, wow, this is much more than a number on a rent roll or buying a stock. This is a family in here, and it just, you realize the responsibility you hold, right? These people, whether they know it or not, they're counting on you for heat, hot water, making sure you use legitimate contractors who are not going to perform, bad repairs on a hot water heater or a boiler that's going to result in gas leak or carbon monoxide or anything, right? So it's a major responsibility because these people are really trusting you with their safety. And finally, rent is generally almost always the household's biggest expense. When you go in there and your business plan is to increase their rent by 30, 40, whatever percentage, there's a strong possibility that they're not going to be able to afford that. And there's a possibility they might not be able to afford to get another apartment of the same size. So I think it's important to just remember that if your business plan is to significantly increase rents going into a deal, you have to be prepared to have that conversation with these people. This was our first major rehab. This is the south side of Newark. I bought this one for about $150,000. It's probably worth around $400 today. So the tenant on the first floor actually wanted to stay, and we made a deal with her. She signed a new lease in exchange for significant renovations, which we were willing to do. But it was so significant, we had to put her in a hotel for 2 months while they were being done. And we ended up going way over budget on this because we were trying really fast, trying to finish it as fast as we could because, this woman's life was uprooted pretty much. She had to live in a hotel, she had dogs, she had kids. She has to get her kids to and from school. It's really inconvenient, right? So we ended up spending a lot of money because we wanted to finish it so fast. But that was okay. And the upper unit was actually being used illegally as an attic apartment. We decided to convert that to one duplex unit, make it legal, 5-bedroom, 2-bath. And that was the first time we learned the Section 8 process, right? What that meant to lease it to a Section 8 tenant. Right, so first we had to complete the RTA package, the request for tenancy approval, submit that to the caseworker. They come out, they do an inspection, they tell you whether or not there's anything wrong, like if it's suitable for occupancy. You make the repairs, if there are any, and then they set the rent, right? Because the rent isn't what the tenant agrees to or what you want. The rent on a Section 8 tenant is what Section 8 determines to be the market, right? So you could have gone through all of that, and at the end, maybe they say, we feel it's worth 100 or 200 less than what you want. So we learned that process and, have done it quite a bit since. First, real dangerous tenant. So this is a property in north side of Newark. It is 2-family. We got a pretty good deal. It was fully vacant when we bought it, and we quickly put tenants inside. And this is when we were first. We didn't really have the application process dialed down, and we may have approved somebody we shouldn't have on the first floor, but nonetheless, they moved in, and once they moved in, they were paying rent for a couple months, but then once the moratorium from COVID went into place, it was crickets. They wouldn't answer the phone, they weren't paying anything, and this was at a time where I was still going and collecting cash from everybody that we had. So I went over there and, thought maybe I could have a conversation with her. I didn't know what she was capable of. Yeah, it's a she, it's a woman. And, I was knocking on the door, not trying to, inside the common area, knocking on her unit door, and I call her, and I could hear her phone ringing on the other side of the door. At that point, I just say, Nicole, I think we can work this out. It's not a big deal, but she, refusing, and I probably stayed a little bit longer than I should have. But at that point, she came over running to the front of the door, barged it down, pointed a gun at me, and pretty much said, get off of her effing property, which I was glad to do. I ran right out here, ran all the way down the block, and she was at the top of the door watching me, making sure I didn't come back, which I respected. But unfortunately, I parked right in front of the house, so I had to wait a little bit and then get out of there once the coast was clear. So after this, I called the police and I said, this is what happened. And they said, well, nobody got hurt. Doesn't seem like that big of a deal. You could file a police report, but doesn't matter. So at that point, you're like, wow, sometimes not even the police can help you. You're really feeling alone at some points in this business. So that was a major learning lesson. And also, we did have a drug house a few houses down, a lot of bad activity, a lot of stuff going on. But luckily, eventually that house was raided and that drug activity was no more. So it became a much safer block. I got a good tenant. It's on a much better block. And the coast has been clear ever since then. But I just want to say, not that you should try to buy properties by no means near a lot of drug dealer activity, but there's always light at the end of the tunnel. You're always going to outlast them, right? That stuff is temporary. But if you get a good deal and you have good tenants and you show your tenants that you care about them and protect them, right, however you can, you're going to outlast them. Cool. All right, this is the first mailing campaign purchase we had. It was a 2-family on the right. This was coincidentally right at the beginning of COVID. This deal, he received our mailer many months before, but it wasn't until COVID hit that he called us. And I think that was only because there was a lot of uncertainty and he couldn't tell what was going to happen, right? He thought basically the world was going to end. So I think he was just looking to liquidate all of his holdings. But when he did that, after about a month or so, I think he started to think like, wow, maybe I shouldn't have let this property go for $90,000. What am I thinking? And so he attempted to retrade the deal. And at that point, luckily, we had a good contract on it. And we were able to force him to close. But that took over a year to get it done. So I just want to say on that, sometimes the best deals take the longest to finally come together. And you have to be persistent for the right deal. It's more than worth all the time, effort, and headache that went into getting it. All right, this is our first project. It was underwater, but it actually became our best deal. It's two families right next to each other in the city of Orange. And we didn't have, there was underlying zoning in place that allowed for a 27-unit project to be built. So that was the plan. We were going to get it approved and then sell it to a developer. However, we didn't realize that to do that project, you still had to be designated developer to do that. And we just simply didn't have the political capital to make that happen. So we had to revert back to renovating the 2 families from top to bottom, which we never would have done the deal specifically for this, right? We spent probably $100,000 more in cost between buying and renovating it than what it was worth at the end of that job. But after we did that, we put 4 tenants in, and PSE&G actually approached us. And we didn't take them seriously at first, but we threw out a ridiculous number, and they countered with what we thought was a ridiculous number in a good way. So we took it, and that, just like that, in 30 days, they closed on it, and our worst deal became our best deal. And this is what it looks like today. This is where it was, the 2 properties, and now it's a massive PSE&G substation. And this tenant, we were actually able to relocate into one of our other buildings, and we still got her today. All right, first apartment complex. This is a 12-unit building in the city of Passaic. This is, like I said, the first real apartment complex and major value add. And when I say value add, like we did everything. We did the roof, the siding, repaved the back parking lot, did all the common areas, the laundry room, and even a lot of the interior apartments. So, I had to learn how to do this around the tenants because they were all living there, right? It was staying in operation. So it took a lot of coordination to make sure that these people, it wasn't too ridiculous, the noise levels and all of that for them to continue with their lives. And when the time came, we waited to do the major rent increases until after these improvements were done, right? Because all the rents were substantially below market, probably like 50% below, 60%. So we waited until a lot of these renovations were in place before we had those conversations with them. And because we put in so much money and we were increasing their standard of living, those conversations went really well. And we ended up retaining 10 out of the 12 apartments when we significantly raised the rent. So it shows that people are basically willing to pay value when they see it being offered. Okay, so the 5 investment rules that we now have based on all of our past experiences, I would always recommend bending on the terms, but never on the price. Because, if you overpay on a deal, it's almost virtually a failure every time, right? But if you put a hard deposit, do whatever necessary to get a great price,
you're generally going to be okay, in my opinion, and you can afford to make more mistakes when you get a property for the right price, right? I'm not saying you don't want to put hard deposits down when you can't afford to lose that money. You know, you have to be prepared to lose it. But I think that it's far more worth to be very aggressive on the terms of a deal to get it for a great price, rather than getting great contractual terms and paying in market value. Rule number 2, this is something, a lot of the properties I previously bought were rent control, but I don't buy rent control properties anymore because reduced cash flow, this could happen where your operating expenses are outpacing your rent increases on an annual basis. And if that continues to happen for, like, eventually you're going to be at break even, not to mention you're going to have almost no price appreciation because most people are only going to be willing to pay what a property is generating in cash flow. And if you have 4 tenants that are at $1,000 a month when the market rent is $2,000, you're not going to get anywhere near what someone who is rented at market value would. In addition to that, there's not really any reason to improve your property when you're not going to get any return out of money you put into the deal. And finally, the rent control ordinances itself, just because it may be landlord friendly at first, maybe the maximum allowable rent control right now is 8% per year or something like that. Any new council member can come along and say, no, we think that's too high, we should drop it down to 5. And then another person comes along, we should drop it down to 3. So it only generally gets worse. I'm not aware of any rent control policies which have been outlawed by council. Very important, you want to know the municipality just as well as you know the deal that you're underwriting and potentially going to buy. Right? Is it a building department? Is it a housing authority? Is it a place that's not friendly to landlords? Are they very anti-landlord? Are they very difficult to deal with? Do they take 3 months to schedule CO inspections when you're trying to put a new tenant in, just increasing your vacancy almost on purpose? Like, these are all very possible things that you have to be cognizant of going into a new town. Crime, obviously, most important. That's the first thing people are going to think about when they're deciding whether or not they want to live in your apartment. They're going to see, are my kids going to be able to walk to and from school? Can they go to the store? Can I go outside? Right? That's first and foremost. You want to make sure the block itself is largely safe. And access to employment. You just want to be ideally somewhere where you can quickly drive, where there's major public transportation, because you want all of your tenants to be able to work, right? You want them to work just because you're going to have a higher collection record if they do, and there's going to be less wear and tear on your apartments when they're not always home. This one's a little bit tricky, but basically, anytime, generally when I buy a property, I'm buying it with hard money, which is just, in other words, short-term loan. It's usually about 12 months, and you pay a very high interest rate, right? Maybe 10 to 12%. And while it's a great tool to close on a property really fast at aggressive terms, you don't want to have too many in place at any one time ever, because you can end up having multiple maturities at one time, having to pay off multiple loans all at the same time. And if rates significantly increase from the time you bought the deal to the time you're planning to do your permanent refinance, you could end up not being able to refinance out of the loan, meaning you could end up having to come to the closing table with money to pay off the loan that you used to purchase the property, right? So you want to minimize your short-term loans wherever possible and take one out every time you're buying a new property with one. And lastly, you want to know what you're inheriting. Obviously, tenant estoppels are extremely important. That's just a form that verifies the terms of the lease, right? If one's in place, that will tell you, basically the tenant is certifying what their monthly rent is, the start date and end date on the lease, and also just as important, the utility responsibilities. Because, there could be an old lease and the seller could say, oh, that's all I have available, and you could rely on that and go into the deal. But ultimately, when it comes down to it, when you buy a property, there's nothing keeping the tenant from saying, oh, look at this lease I have. It's 10 years, it's 20 years, it's at this rent amount, I have this security deposit actually being held. At that point, it's your word against theirs, and you never like your chances as a landlord going to landlord-tenant court for something like that. So if you can afford it and get that worked out prior to closing, Best case scenario. All right, so these are some of the property management services we offer. There's three main pillars to property management. We have repairs, leasing, and rent collection. That's off on the rental side for landlords. And then similarly for the HOAs, repairs, HOA fee collection, and then the bylaw enforcement. And that's just some of our technology stack, all the different things we use on a daily basis. One thing I want to point out, we use Plano-Manic, which is they do high-end photography, like they'll come out and not only give you professional photos, but they give you a nice walkthrough on a floor plan and a 3D walkthrough, right? So this does two things for you. Number one, it increases, the visibility of your listing on Zillow, because Zillow recognizes that you're putting out really good content. So your listing is going to be seen faster than other listings in that area who have basic iPhone type photos. And secondly, I think this really pushes you apart from the competition, because tenants care not just about the property, but who the landlord is. If they see that the landlord is willing to, invest $300, nice photos, whatever, for an $1,800 a month apartment, I think that says a lot about them and shows them that they have a little bit of pride in what they're offering and gives you a little bit of an edge over your competition. And finally, I think one of the most important things is that depending on where you're investing, you want to have access to good legal assistance at good rates. We have an attorney on retainer, and so we're able to get a lot of things at fixed cost and know what that's going to be. That could be filing an eviction complaint, monetary damage, going to a court date, notice to quit, all that stuff. So we know exactly what we're going to pay, and we're able to extend that to the people we work with. And this is the Viza Realtor Referral Program I was talking about. So we are not in the business of buying or selling real estate, right? Representing owners in that way. All we want to do is property management and maybe buy properties ourselves. So I feel that, as a real estate agent, a lot of times maybe you don't have a reason to speak with your owners when they're not actively buying or selling. So I think that by being able to refer a property management server, right, as an ancillary service that you're able to provide through us, you're able to remain in front of those people, right, all the time. And I would think there's a much better chance of you getting those sale listings when it does come time to sell, because you were, in a way, involved this entire time. In addition to that, you can earn referral fees. So any referrals we get, we will pay you broker fees, 20% of the rental broker fees that we get for the duration the properties under management with us for the entire tenure. Or you can end up leasing yourself. If you're a real estate agent that wants to get those broker fees on the lease, that's something we can do as well. We'll notify you every time a unit becomes available, and you can come out and lease it. So again, we're not in competition with realtors. One thing we do, we sign off on non-competes saying that we can't list properties that realtors refer over to us, just to double down on the fact that that's not our business. We just want to do property management. And I do feel it just makes you, a better asset for your clients. It makes you overall more valuable to them. And I think that's all I got for you guys tonight. So any questions, I'm happy to answer.
Real quick, an interruption. I just want to say, I feel like tonight is metaphorical for having a bad deal. Situations come up. We can't predict them. You just steamroll right through it. You endured. This is the first ever CBS Sports podcast collaboration with the Elevate event. So give it up for Larry Ridley over there podcasting for CBS Sports. Didn't know this was happening, but we made it work, so thank you, and let's open it up to some questions on that note.
I have one. Where I am.
Ed? Can you project, so we're all bringing the mic?
Yeah, I live in the first one.
It's a general question about the web-based testing, Tommy, since you're going from town to town. I've been speaking to other investors, and it sounds like different towns are actually interpreting the rules very differently.
Yeah, some towns don't enforce it at all, which is fantastic. Some towns do like a visual test. Some towns do a lead dust test, which is the most the biggest one, where they actually send lab results to a lab and see whether or not it's going to pass. But the thing is too, even on the lab results, different towns have different requirements as to what they find acceptable and not acceptable. So you really want to have an idea of the property, the town you're looking to invest in, how, number one, what they use, are they doing anything visual or lead test, and then also like how strict they are with their requirements. Because I know a couple of lead inspectors, there's a couple towns in New Jersey they refuse to go to for any amount of money because they're so strict.
Jay, hearing about your investors for your deals that you raise capital, that's what I do as well. So I'm wondering how you structure your investors and your deals with them.
Yeah. So usually with the investors, I structure it in such a way where whatever percentage of the cash they put up as needed to close on the deal, say they put up 50% of the cash needed to do the deal, they would get a return back of 50% of the net cash flows of the property. Net cash flow, refi proceeds, sale proceeds, until they're paid back in full, and then they would have an equity percentage in perpetuity. In that case, it's dependent upon the deal, but generally around 20% is how I've been doing it.
What's return of capital? You get the return of capital, their equity goes down, and then.
Yes. Yes, exactly. In that case, it would probably be between 20 to 25%. It's usually like 40 to 50% of the cash put in the deal in perpetuity.
Are you pulling them together with multiple investors, or are you doing one person?
Ideally, I use one person on certain deals because it gets like kind of cumbersome, something like the investment updates. I try not to do any more than like 3 people on a certain deal. And we do put up a considerable amount of our own money in the deal when we have to. But ideally, no more than 3, just because it's hard to manage the number of people.
Anything else?
When you're talking to a tenant that you inherit about increasing rent, how do you go about that? How do you have that conversation?
Yeah, well, I tell them, like, you should be happy. You've had a great deal for a long time. You should have some money saved up. You should, so at the end of the day, if you're in a non-rent controlled municipality, in my opinion, you're doing what you're allowed to do. You're exercising your right to get what the property's worth, and in turn, you're also responsible to put those monies back in to make it a market rate apartment. But I usually am very flexible with tenants who really need the help, right? What I first try to do is see if they could downsize, if I can help them move into another apartment that we have nearby. But if not, I'll give them plenty of time, right, at their current rent, whatever that is, to find something else, maybe even sometimes a number of free months if they really seriously can't afford it, to give them that push they need to qualify for the next year. I'm saying in instances where I'm looking to increase the rent to market value, but that tenant simply can't afford it, I'll look to work with them however I can, whether that be keeping their rent the same or just simply giving them a free month, no rent, for a number of months to give them the ability to save up for a first month security deposit at the next place if they're unwilling to pay what I'm wanting to charge. Well, it brings up the value of the property and in turn increases, right, the net refi proceeds. Right, that's ultimately generally the goal, to kind of maximize the value of the property and take as much equity out as we can. So, from what I've seen, it almost always makes sense to do that, or even buy tenants out. We generally don't do that; we just give them a lot of time. But I think financially speaking, it definitely makes sense.
That property that PSNG bought said that they were over budget. Who even like that? That's crazy.
That's exactly what I said. I said this deal. It was the middle of COVID, and we were in a really bad place. We had used a private lender, an individual, who had given us a loan to buy the property while we were going to get approvals. That didn't happen, so we had to get a hard money loan to do the renovation and bring the properties back to life. But at that time, no one was lending any money because it was right in the middle of COVID. So we were at risk of defaulting on that loan until this guy, Ed Hendrickson, I don't know where he came from, found a guy, a single guy, who was willing to come in and take us out of that loan, give us the rehab funds needed to finish the job, and finally get us to the sale. Did I just pick up on that?
That's awesome.
Self-pride, you know?
Good man. Anyone else? Everyone has to hear.
How many evictions do you deal with a year?
We're probably in court 2 times a month, so probably like 24 times. A lot of those evictions don't end up in evictions, you know? A lot of times people just make you go through the song and dance, go to court, and then they pay. You know, or you work out settlement agreements with them at that time. So, probably get to actual lockout, probably like 10 or 12 times a year. Right now. Oh, okay, so yeah, you know how it goes.
I do have a serious question about your eviction. So, I know it can be a very emotional thing for a landlord or maybe someone who owns 1 or 2 properties. I've heard that's like the best eviction, I guess, agreement. You have to look at it like a business. So try to take as much money as you can, get them to start paying if they don't pay. Everybody wants their money right away, but if you can talk about put people on payment plans, I'm sure, isn't it kind of automatic? We have the eviction attorney here, but if they don't make the payment on that plan, it triggers the eviction.
Yeah, that's what we always look to do, a pay and stay agreement if we can. Because we don't want to throw anybody out, we just want to get the rent that was agreed to be paid, right? So anytime we get to a court date, right, you know, it's one thing, we already got all the way to that point. It's probably been 2 months from the time we filed it, so they had 2 months to pay, they didn't pay, now we're at court. And I say, listen, you know, we could go and try to get a judgment against you and just, you know, get acquisition of the unit if you're not willing to pay in full. But most of the time, we do try to work out a pay and stay agreement where they can pay, you know, the balance off over time in exchange for staying at the unit. But I'm in favor of doing that in any way possible because if they don't comply with that pay agreement, you don't have to go back to court. You can just, you know, go right file a warrant for removal immediately once they, you know, don't comply. So they get another chance to stay if they really want.
Does anyone have Section 8 tenants? Can you do anything to speed up that process? Some municipalities, it's painful.
Not in the city building, not my experience on this. But I would say I really like working with the DCA. The DCA, all their caseworkers, from my experience, are pretty good, easy to work with. They answer the phone, they answer the emails. I would say it all depends on the agency, because there's nothing you could do to make these people answer the phone. You know, in my experience, the city of Newark, I mean, multiple housing authorities are pretty tough. But it all depends on where you are. I'll tell you one thing, the city of Elizabeth, their housing authority is amazing. Really good.
John?
You talking about getting rid of Section 8 tenants?
No, just honestly, communication with the caseworker and how to speed it up. Sometimes I just feel like I'm emailing myself or calling myself 100 times.
If you want to get rid of them, just put your property under contract and then send it over to them. They'll relocate them in 30 to 60 days. Never has to close.
That's a good idea. Ta-da! All right.
Any last questions? I'm out, so.
Yeah, sure, I'll take it.
David, right?
How you doing? Yeah.
Cool.
Sure. So my question to you is, over the past couple of months, with the Doge cuts and HUD and Trump, I believe Trump's been cutting HUD's budget, and they've done a lot of layoffs. Has that affected me personally?
Cutting HUD's budget, you said?
Yeah. Because I've heard a lot of landlords in the city, they've seen a lot of reductions in rent payments on time.
Yeah, I would expect if you have HUD Section 8 type tenants, but I don't have any of my Section 8 tenants are either local, county, or state. So I figured, if I had any HUD tenants, yeah, maybe, definitely, but I haven't had any experience in federal tenants yet.
All right, let's give it up one more time for Tommy. And thank you all for coming. A lot of new faces again. So it's great to see everyone, meet new people. Thank you to Mike Gian at Movement Mortgage for sponsoring. Thank you to Ryan, Smiley Impact, making the world a better place. And thank you to Reed, our bartender at 902 Brewery. And that's it. Let's keep hanging out until James shuts us down.
Yeah, it is. I know.
I want to thank Jordan Zuber for having me out here tonight at the Elevate Networking event. Had a really good time. I spoke a lot for Viza Property Management. It's about some of the pitfalls, right, that you typically encounter. A little bit of a change of scenery from what's previously usually talked about, which is a success and how much money people made. I feel like I really did a better job of showing the reality of what it means to manage real estate and be a real estate investor. So I hope everybody learned a lot tonight. And Tom Visaggio, Viza Property Management, contact us for your needs.